Well, hello there, Vlad here. Welcome to my studio and welcome to the first ever episode of How I Mixed It. I've been thinking about doing this video series for a while and I'm finally turning the switch on, pulling the plug, one of those things. And the idea is very simple here. I'm going to break down a mix I've done and explain why I did what I did, how I did it. And hopefully this way you can pick up a mixing trick and technique here and there that can help you improve your mixes as well. Simple as that, really. By the way, if you want to record your own music in your home studio, check out my free home studio setup course by following the link below in the description. As of shooting this video, it's January 2021, but let's jump back in time just a little bit back to the Christmas time. I did an acoustic live cover here in my studio with my sister Maria, and we did Silent Night but in Finnish, so it's Jouluyö, Juhlayö, and here's how the whole thing sounded. As you can tell, the whole thing is kind of moody, ambient thing, but we're just using 3 elements, 2 vocals and 1 acoustic guitar. And let's jump to the mix to see what I did to make it sound the way it did. Jumping into the Logic project, as you can see, it's basically just 4 tracks and I'm not even using one of them. We'll dive into that in a second. And it's Maria's vocals, my vocals, acoustic guitar, actually with 2 microphones, but I ended up using just the DI sound. I'll dive into that in a bit. And we did cheat a little bit by recording a few kind of harmonies in the 3rd verse just to kind of lift it up even more, and we'll talk about that as well in a second. And I just have to mention that the clip we just heard might sound slightly different than the one we're taking a look at here, just because I recently had to switch computers and some of my Waves plugins just completely refused to work on this computer. So I had to do slight changes to the mix, just use different plugins to perform the same role, if you will. But let's jump to the mix and start with the acoustic guitar. I was using my Tele 110E and I was going from the D out straight into the recording interface and also miking it up with an Rode NTG2 that I pointed at the 12th fret from, I don't know, this kind of distance, maybe a bit further. And the idea was to blend the two. But if we take a listen at the Rode track over here, you can tell that a lot of the vocals are bleeding in there, and I can try to fix that a little bit with EQ and some compression as well. Well, actually I didn't even do any kind of compression with it. But that really didn't help, so I ended up muting the whole track altogether. And it didn't actually matter because the DI track actually sounds really good. I've disabled all the plugins from here for now. I'm fingerpicking here and I think it sounds very decent. The only things I did for this track were using this Chris Lord Algae plugin that is really great. I just took like an acoustic Big Sky preset from it and it's basically doing some EQ, some compression, there's a reverb and delay as well, and it's kind of doing this stereo spread of this track so you can actually hear some of the bouncing around. I have like this edge preset going on. And as you can tell, it's adding a lot of ambience by keeping the actual guitar in the middle and then just adding some delay and reverb around it, and it already sounds so much bigger. While I might have my issues with the waves, this Chris Lord Algae plugin bundle for guitar, bass, drums, vocals, and I think synths is the 5th one. This is really good. These are like quick mix presets that allow you to get really good results without like really stacking a bunch of plugins together. They've stacked those plugins into this one plugin, and there's a bunch of cool presets that you can then later tweak as well. Really, really cool stuff. I think this makes a big difference. And the second thing that I wanted to do is to add some warmth to it. I was using a different tape saturation plugin, but as I mentioned, a few of them stopped working. So I'm using the Universal Audio Oxide tape, which is also really good. As you can tell, it's adding both warmth and kind of presence to the guitar as well, and just makes it a bit rounder and thicker, which is something you can do when we're talking about like a 3-piece band. There's kind of room to make the acoustic sound a bit more thick. And yeah, that's what I'm doing. Then I'm also sending it to a reverb over here, which is the Valhalla Supermassive, and I'm using the massive vocal preset as well. And with making ambient sounds, it's really important to cut out a lot of the high end and a lot of the low end as well, because you don't want to have like muddy low end mushing up all the mixes in the reverb track, and same goes for the highs as well. You don't want to be that apparent, and it's kind of just big wave on the background without like it being too present, and playing with the EQ controls on the reverb is really important to make that happen. So yeah, DI, just the Chris Lord Algae plugin, some oxide tape to add some thickness to the acoustic guitar, and sending it to a reverb. And I'm also sending a bunch of other tracks into the reverb as well. And by sending everything into the same reverb, it actually makes everything sound a bit more kind of, is the word cohesive, like everything kind of working together, because all of those tracks are kind of triggering the reverb. I think you get the idea. And let's jump to the vocals next and start with Maria's vocals. She's an amazing singer, as you can tell, and let's disable everything I've done here to take a listen. Let's take out the reverb as well.
Kaikon työ, kaks vain valveilon puolisoa.
Yeah. She's really good. But as you can also tell, there's acoustic guitar bleeding into that microphone a little bit.
Lapsen.
And I think actually here at the end there might be my vocals bleeding into it as well.
On kunnia Jumalalle.
A little bit. It's something you just have to deal with. And I started with a very basic thing by cutting out some low end from it. It just makes a big difference, and we're not overloading our master track.
Vain valveilon puolisoa.
You don't even really notice the difference, but it's making sure that none of the low end things are going to the master tracks, and that just affects how it sounds. Cut out the excess low end you're not using. Simple as that. The second plugin is de-esser. Simple as that. It's taking out all of the S's.
Lapsen hertaisen nukkues.
Yeah, the fun thing is that you can output just the S's on this, and as you can tell, it's just removing the sounds and makes them softer. Really, really cool plugin. And again, I went for the Chris Lord Algae thing at the end, and this time I'm using a vocal preset here. She sings so evenly that I don't even have to compress it that much or anything like that. As you can see, I'm adding a little bit of reverb and a tiny bit of slapback delay just to make it a bit more kind of ambient within the vocal itself, and then obviously also sending it to the master reverb. And as you can tell, I'm not sending as much of the lead vocal into the reverb or anything, because it needs to be kind of more in front. And one of the things with the reverb is that the more you add reverb, the further something seems to be in the back. So I'm trying to avoid that and adding just a little bit of width and ambience. Everything else around her vocal is ambient, but the vocal itself has to be fairly dry for it to be kind of in front, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. So that's that. Then we can move on to my vocal that actually only starts happening here in the second verse. First of all, I'm singing really quietly here, because if I also sing really loudly, our voices will kind of bleed into each other's microphones, and that won't be a good thing. Plus, it's still kind of a smaller part of the song. I do sing a bit more loudly here in the third verse. And also what happened here was I started with the wrong lyric, so what I ended up doing. So there's like a single consonant here, I think that's wrong. Oh no, there isn't, but like I did a quick fade here to kind of hide a little bit the fact that I pronounced the wrong word there, and you can't really tell it in the full mix. Okay, it's a little bit noticeable, but not as noticeable if I take that fade out that I added here. So there's that. And again, the same thing, some low end cut, actually more low and like mid-range cut as well, because I'm the backing vocalist here. I don't need to be in front as much. So that's what's happening. Again, D S. Then again, the same Chris Lord algae plugin. As you can tell, Maria's vocal bleeding into my microphone creates some slightly weird glitches, and if you're doing live sessions, I highly recommend using as much of like dynamic microphones, like I use the SM7B for example, because those are not as sensitive, and if you have enough gain on your audio interface, like you can find the great balance between capturing the dynamics of the vocalist, but also making sure that anything else isn't really bleeding into that. So I was singing into a Lewitt LCT 240 Pro, and it's picking up a bit more of the stuff happening around me, and as you can tell, the plugins and everything and the ESA reacts kind of funnily to it. There's little glitches going on. But it's something you cannot avoid here. I think it still sounds fine in the mix, so I didn't really mind. I didn't start to like denoising it or anything like that. And again, Chris Lord algae plugin here. Let's go for the louder part. Again, it's slightly out of tune in places, and it's also, again, wrong word here, I think. Yeah. So I'm cutting a lot of the bass. Treble is at 0 basically. I'm really slamming my vocals with compression, and there's a little bit of reverb and slap delay going on as well. Again, adding some ambience in the track itself, but also obviously sending it to the master reverb, that is. Gain plugin on this track is only because I had already done the automation for the vocals and only then realized that I need to bring the overall backing vocal a little bit higher. So instead of just adjusting all of the automation here, I actually ended up just putting a gain plugin on here and boosting it with 1.1 decibels to just bring the overall track up a little bit. That's one way to do it if you don't want to like manually write all of these. And speaking of automation, I think that's really important because vocals are really dynamic, and if you like try to bring them down with just compression, you'll end up with a very unnatural sounding vocal tracks, and there's no dynamics going on. And especially with a song like this, you want it to be dynamic. So instead of like trying to just heavily compress everything, I'm just doing simple automation here and there. I think I'm cutting out, like, there's a break somewhere over here. Oh yeah, I think she coughs or something here, so I'm like doing a small dip in the volume so it's not as apparent. I think the same thing happens here. And for example, here where I start singing more loudly, I'm bringing it down several decibels to kind of match the increase in volume and stuff like that. And here I'm actually like adjusting my vocals almost per phrase, because this is the part where I sing the loudest, so I'm bringing that down so I'm not like pushing too much in the mix. Stuff like that. Automation is really great tool. Think of it as like someone sitting at a console, and when the different part comes, them just pulling up and down a volume level. Simple as that, and it's really powerful. I highly recommend doing that instead of trying to use bunch of compressors and stuff to make everything sound super even. To kind of lift up the last verse, we wanted to do some groove vocals here, so this is what we recorded. Yeah, so there's what, 8 tracks of us, so it was 4 takes. Basically just this preset on everything, really slamming with the compressor, cutting out a lot of the low end, even some of the high end with the channel EQs over here, and just doing this bump at 1.2k. I'm actually using the backing vocals preset in the EQ in Logic, and a little bit of ambience again going on there, but not a lot. And I'm actually sending all of these tracks outputs into this aux channel here, where I'm really slamming them with the compressor, and also doing some stereo spread over here. There's like a EQ, there's some dynamic EQ which reacts to different frequencies, there's a vintage compressor and tape saturation, and imager which basically does like a stereo spread. It's taking some of the frequencies and like moving them from here to like, well, basically widens them. So let's take a listen to what this plugin does. Yeah, I'm singing with a bigger dynamic range, meaning that my quieter parts are a bit too quiet and my loud parts are a bit too loud. Maria is much more kind of even with her volume. So actually slamming those with like compressors does a great job. There's a huge difference. Again, it's just more even and more present, and only then I'm sending all of that into the Reverb plugin. And yeah, that's how the whole track came to be. And that wraps up how I mixed it, episode number 1. Would love to hear what you think. Let me know down below in the comment section down below. And if you have any questions about that mix, or how I produced it or anything like that, ask those questions in the comment section down below. And also, if you're new to the channel, like the content and want to see more in the future, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell as well. Thank you for watching. I shall see you next time.